My name is Evelyn Gallegos, and I'm 32 years old. The chandeliers above the Fairmont Hotel ballroom shimmered like constellations, scattering light across hundreds of sequined gowns and crystal flutes. Laughter mingled with the gentle hum of the string quartet, a perfect soundtrack for my brother David's wedding, a flawless production down to the last napkin fold. I stood near the edge of the crowd, adjusting the strap of my plain black dress. It wasn't designer, wasn't silk, and it certainly didn't sparkle under the lights like everyone else's. Still, I wore it like armor. The truth was, I preferred blending in. It was easier to stay invisible in a room obsessed with perfection. At the head table, my brother stood tall in his tuxedo confidence radiating from every carefully rehearsed gesture. His bride Amanda looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury bridal catalog, radiant, polished, expensive. The two of them were every parent's dream. I raised my champagne glass when the MC handed David the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate the most important day of my life." Polite applause, flashing cameras, the sound of crystal clinking. My stomach tightened. I knew what was coming, the part of his speech where he talked about family. "I want to thank my parents for their unwavering support," he said, smiling toward them at table 2. Mom's face glowed with pride, her hand resting on Dad's sleeve. They looked like they were basking in the light of their son's achievement, their golden child marrying into wealth and power. And of course, David continued, turning slightly toward me. "I can't forget my sister Evelyn." My heart stilled. Well, he said with a light chuckle, "she's still trying to figure life out." Laughter rippled softly through the crowd. A few sympathetic glances darted my way. I forced a polite smile as heat crawled up my neck. "She's always been the dreamer in the family," he added, a patronizing lilt in his tone. "While I was busy building a career, Evelyn was busy exploring creative projects. We're all hoping she'll find her direction soon." The words were delivered like a joke, but they landed like a slap. "Here's to my sister," he concluded, raising his glass. "May she find her path someday." The room erupted in polite applause. "Hear, hear," someone called like it was all in good fun. I raised my glass too, my hand trembling slightly. My smile felt like it had been stapled in place. Beneath it, my mind spun fragments of past years, their voices, their doubts. "When are you going to get a real job, Evelyn? You're so smart, but you never stick to anything." "Maybe you just need stability, honey. Something simple." They didn't know that while David was climbing the corporate ladder, I was building an empire one algorithm at a time. They didn't know the late nights, the patents, the negotiations. They couldn't fathom it. To them, technology meant I fixed printers or helped with Wi-Fi passwords. But tonight, I wasn't thinking about the millions in licensing deals or the fact that my work was quietly transforming entire industries. I was thinking about how, even with all that, a few careless words could still make me feel 12 years old, small, unseen, unworthy. Evelyn Amanda's cheerful voice sliced through my thoughts. "Come on, family photos." I pasted on a smile. Of course. We gathered near the wedding arch, the photographer positioning us with professional efficiency. "Closer, everyone. That's it. And smile." "Evelyn, this is a celebration." I widened my smile jaw tight. Every flash of the camera, another reminder that I was being captured in a moment where I didn't belong. Mom appeared at my elbow as the photographer adjusted his lens. "Sweetheart," she whispered. I was just talking to Amanda's mother. Her friend owns a small company that's hiring an administrative assistant. Good benefits, regular hours. Very stable. I told her you might be interested. Her tone was gentle, almost maternal, but every word stung. "Administrative assistant," I echoed softly. She nodded enthusiastically. "It could be a great start, honey. You've been searching for something steady." I bit down on my tongue before sarcasm could escape. The same mouth that had explained machine learning optimization to investors now forced out a polite, "That's thoughtful, Mom. I'll think about it." She smiled, relieved, oblivious. Dinner followed. The conversation around me was a parade of self-congratulation promotions. Real estate, European vacations. Whenever someone asked what I did for a living, I gave my usual answer. I work in technology. "Oh," Amanda's aunt leaned in, interested. "Do you sell computers?" "Something like that," I said, offering a small smile. It was easier this way to let them underestimate me. Easier than trying to explain concepts like adaptive neural architectures or real-time data modeling to people who thought coding was just typing fast. Still under the table, I could feel the tremor in my fingers, the anger I'd learned to keep buried. because what David didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my name had become whispered in rooms far grander than this one. Rooms filled with venture capitalists, CEOs, and government officials. My algorithms powered decisions that moved economies. My patents were worth more than this entire ballroom. And yet here among my family, I was the dreamer, the failure, the sister who couldn't quite find her path. A waiter passed by refilling glasses. I stared at the golden liquid, my reflection rippling inside it, and thought maybe tonight that illusion ends. Maybe tonight they see me for who I really am. But the universe, as usual, had its own sense of timing. "Excuse me," a deep voice said. Nearby, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Sorry to interrupt, but are you Evelyn Gallegos?" The question froze the air around me. I turned and found myself staring at Robert Morrison, Amanda's father, the CEO of Morrison Technologies, a man whose company's name I'd seen on countless research contracts, patent agreements, and licensing deals. My pulse spiked. He was holding his phone, staring at me as if I were a ghost who had stepped out of his inbox. "Are you," he repeated slowly, "the Evelyn Gallegos who holds the patents on adaptive neural network architectures?" The clinking glasses stopped. Conversations faltered. 300 eyes turned toward me. And in that suspended silence, my entire double life teetered on the edge of exposure. The sound of my name still hung in the air like static. Robert Morrison, one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley, was standing 3 feet away, staring at me with disbelief that was rapidly transforming into excitement. I forced myself to breathe evenly. "Yes," I said carefully. "I'm Evelyn Gallegos." Robert's eyes lit up. "Unbelievable. My company just finalized the licensing deal for your AI patents. We've been trying to reach you through your legal team for weeks." Every head at the table turned toward me. My parents, my brother Amanda. I could see confusion flicker into alarm. You know her," David stammered. "Know her," Robert laughed, elated. "She's revolutionizing our entire data infrastructure. The adaptive neural framework she built, it's genius. My engineers call it the most efficient architecture in the industry." A silence thick enough to drown in spread through the table. My mother's fork fell from her hand and clattered against her plate. My father blinked like he was trying to reconcile the words "my daughter" and "revolutionizing industry" in the same sentence. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. The secret I had guarded for years, the invisible life I'd built in silence, had just been dragged into the light in front of 300 people. Robert was still talking, oblivious to the emotional earthquake at our table. "Do you have any idea what your work means for the future of AI processing? We're projecting a 400% increase in efficiency because of your algorithms." David's mouth fell open. 400%, he echoed weakly, as though repeating it might make it make sense. Robert nodded, his enthusiasm uncontainable. "Your patents are the cornerstone of the deal we just signed, worth about $200 million, and that's only phase 1. You should be proud, Evelyn. What you've built is extraordinary." Gasps rippled through nearby tables. Guests were whispering, watching. My mother's face had gone pale. She looked as though she'd been dropped into another universe. $200 million, she whispered. I tried to speak, but my voice came out thin. "It's part of a larger project. The patents cover adaptive neural networks for real-time decision-making systems." Robert grinned. Of course, I've read your published work. Brilliant stuff. Stanford's graduate programs are using your papers now. You're shaping the future of AI research." The words felt distant, surreal. Around me, people were staring. The same people who'd clinked glasses moments earlier while laughing at David's toast about his lost sister. Now they looked at me like I was someone else entirely. Robert turned towards my family. "You must be so proud," he said warmly. "It's not every day you discover your daughter is one of the most innovative minds in technology." My father's lips parted, but no sound came out. My mother blinked rapidly, color returning to her cheeks only to drain again. David looked shell-shocked. His earlier smugness had evaporated, replaced by something rawer guilt. Robert checked his phone. "Actually, I'd love to introduce you to our CTO. He's been obsessed with your research papers for months." "May I call him?" I forced a small, shaky smile. "Sure." He stepped away, already dialing. The second he was out of earshot, the silence at our table cracked open. Evelyn Mom whispered. "What? What is he talking about? Patents $200 million AI." I took a deep breath, my heart thudding against my ribs. "It's true. I've been working on artificial intelligence systems for the last 6 years. I filed my first patent 3 years ago. The licensing deals have been successful." David's face twisted, part disbelief, part regret. 6 years. You mean while we thought you were unemployed? I finished softly. Yes. Mom blinked rapidly, her voice trembling. You let us think you were struggling. Because trying to explain my work to you never went well, I said quietly. Every time I tried, it turned into a lecture about getting a stable job or being realistic. David opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. Before anyone could respond, Robert returned, still buzzing with excitement. Our CTO nearly fainted when I told him you were here. He says your latest optimization model is the biggest leap in AI logic since Turing's theorem. My father cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, forgive me, but are you saying my daughter's inventions are worth hundreds of millions? Robert smiled broadly. At minimum. Once the next set of patents are commercialized, it could be billions. She's reshaping how companies process data. Dad's hand tightened around his glass until I feared it would shatter. Billions, he murmured. I wanted to disappear not because of shame, but because I'd never wanted this to be how they found out. Not through a public revelation, not through someone else's excitement. But it was too late. The masks were off. Excuse me, said a familiar voice. It was Amanda, the bride, still in her elegant white gown, watching me with wide eyes. You're that Evelyn Gallegos, the one on Forbes's Tech Innovators list. I winced. That was supposed to stay low profile. Her jaw dropped. Oh my God, you were that anonymous researcher. Now even more heads turned. The whisper spread like wildfire through the crowd. The sister, the tech genius, worth millions. David's face had gone pale. You've been on Forbes. Yes, I admitted. Under a pseudonym. It was safer that way. The photographer, sensing the shift in the room, subtly repositioned himself as if to capture whatever this was. Robert leaned in. Evelyn, I can't tell you how honored we are to be working with your technologies. I'll have my office arrange a proper meeting next week. The industry's been waiting to meet you. And just like that, he was gone again, swallowed by a sea of curious faces. I sat down slowly. My champagne glass trembled in my hand. Across from me, David exhaled shakily. You let me talk about you like that. His voice was low, stunned, in front of everyone. I didn't let you, I said softly. You never asked. The words hung heavy between us. He blinked as if seeing me for the first time. I thought you were lost, Evelyn. I thought you were chasing things that didn't matter. I know, I said. You all did. Mom covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Why didn't you tell us? I met her gaze steadily. Because you never would have believed me. The ballroom's music swelled again, but it felt like it was coming from another world. Around us, whispers spread like wildfire, and I could feel every stare, people recalibrating who I was in their minds. I'd spent years hiding in plain sight, and now whether I wanted it or not, I was exposed. The sister they pitied was gone. The woman they'd dismissed had just rewritten the narrative of the entire room. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel invisible. The ballroom's air felt heavier, now charged, electric, thick with whispers. Wherever I turned, I caught half-finished sentences and sideways glances. The same people who had politely smiled at me an hour ago were now craning their necks trying to catch another glimpse of the genius sister. Amanda's father, Robert Morrison, had vanished into a huddle of executives eager to confirm what they'd just heard. Amanda herself stood frozen beside David, her elegant smile cracking at the edges. I, meanwhile, was trying to steady my breathing. My pulse still hadn't slowed since the moment my name detonated through the room. My mother was the first to break the silence at our table. Evelyn, she said softly, her hands trembling on the tablecloth. Is this real? $200 million patents neural. What? Neural network architectures, I finished quietly. They're systems that help computers learn and make decisions more efficiently. Her lips parted as though to speak again, but nothing came out. My father looked like he'd been struck by lightning, pride, disbelief, and something else flickering behind his eyes. Then David finally spoke. You've been working on this for 6 years. Yes, I said. While you were building your investment firm, I was building a company too, just not one anyone could see. He laughed once, but it wasn't humor. Well, I thought you were unemployed. Because that's what you all chose to believe, I replied softly. Every time I tried to tell you, you brushed it off. You thought I was lost, so I stopped trying. The words landed like stones. Mom's eyes glistened. We weren't trying to hurt you. We just wanted you to be safe, stable. I know, I said. But you defined stability as things I never wanted. A corporate job, a title, a predictable life. You didn't see that what I was building mattered too. David's voice was shaking now. You let me humiliate you in front of 300 people. Why didn't you say anything? My throat tightened. Would it have mattered if I had? He blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? I've tried to share things before. Remember 3 years ago, Christmas dinner, I paused, meeting his eyes. I told you about my first patent. You said it sounded complicated and asked when I'd get a real job. His mouth opened, then closed again as the memory hit him. And Mom, I continued, turning to her. Remember when I wanted to take you both out to dinner after I got my first licensing check? You said we should wait until I had steady employment. She covered her mouth, horrified. Oh, Evelyn. How much was the check? Dad asked quietly. 50 million. The words hung in the air like a spell. Someone at the next table gasped. My mother's eyes widened, her hand clutching the edge of the tablecloth. Thumdy! David leaned back, exhaling a disbelieving laugh. That's not possible. I met his gaze evenly. It was. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the low murmur of a dozen conversations that had shifted focus to our table. 500 million, I said, almost to myself. That's how much the patents have generated so far. Dad blinked, stunned. You mean you're a millionaire? Multimillionaire, I corrected gently. But that's not the point. David's face flushed. Not the point. You let me stand up there and... He stopped, voice cracking. I made jokes about you, about your failures. The guilt in his voice was so raw I almost pitied him. Almost. I didn't need to correct you, I said quietly. You were already certain of who I was. Nothing I said would have changed that. For a long moment, the weight of silence pressed down on us again. Then Dad finally spoke, his voice low and even. You hid all this because you didn't think we'd understand. I hid it, I said, because every time I tried to be understood, I was made smaller. So I built something bigger instead. Mom began to cry softly, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. We thought we were helping you. I know, I whispered, but you were helping me become invisible. A waiter passed by, refilling glasses. His hands trembled slightly as he poured mine, his eyes flicking between us, clearly aware he was standing in the middle of a family implosion. At that moment, Robert Morrison returned, oblivious to the emotional carnage he'd caused. Evelyn, he said cheerfully. I just spoke to my CTO. He's ecstatic. You've been on our internal wish list for months. The entire tech division is obsessed with your work. You're practically a legend. Mom let out a small sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. A legend, she whispered. Robert smiled warmly. Truly. I don't mean to intrude, but if you ever consider new partnerships, we'd love to discuss exclusive development rights, the kind of deal that could fund a small country. David inhaled sharply. A small country. Robert chuckled, mistaking the disbelief for humor. I'm serious. Your sister's innovations are that valuable. I gave him a gracious nod. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I appreciate that. Please call me Robert. And Evelyn? He leaned in, slightly lowering his voice. It's a privilege to finally meet the woman behind the code. Then he was gone again, off to charm another cluster of guests. The silence he left behind was suffocating. David stared at the tablecloth. You could have told me. You wouldn't have listened, I said softly. He nodded slowly. You're probably right. Then after a pause, I don't think I've ever been more ashamed in my life. His voice cracked on the last word. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Evelyn, sweetheart, she whispered. We were wrong. We thought we were protecting you, but all we did was make you feel unseen. I'm so sorry. Her words hit something deep inside me. For years, I'd fantasized about this moment being acknowledged, being believed. And yet now that it was here, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy, fragile. Maybe I said softly, we all just need to start over. Dad raised his glass, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. To Evelyn, he said, the daughter we didn't know we had, and the woman we're finally proud to see. Mom followed, tears streaking her face. To Evelyn. David hesitated, then clinked his glass against mine. To my sister, he murmured, the one who found her way long before I ever did. As our glasses met, the room around us blurred, the music, the chatter, the glittering chandeliers fading into the background. For the first time in years, I wasn't the invisible one at the table. But beneath the surface, I couldn't ignore the flicker of something else, unease. Because when secrets like mine break into the light, they don't just change how people see you. They change what they expect from you next. By the time the orchestra began its next soft waltz, the ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a stage where everyone was pretending they hadn't just witnessed a family's identity detonate. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes. Every whisper, every side glance was another invisible thread pulling at me. The woman who'd been a quiet afterthought an hour ago had become the night's main spectacle. Amanda approached hesitantly, still in her gown, her perfect smile wavering. Evelyn, I'm so sorry for what David said earlier. If I had known— It's fine, I said gently. You couldn't have known something I never shared. David stood beside her, silent eyes fixed on the floor. His champagne glass was empty now, his posture smaller than I'd ever seen. Mom reached out, smoothing the tablecloth, though it was already flat. Sweetheart, she whispered, her voice quivering. I still can't believe this. All these years you were living two lives. In a way, I said, one visible, one invisible. Dad leaned forward, studying me, the way he used to when I was little, as if memorizing my face. You never looked unhappy, he said quietly. Not really. I wasn't, I answered. But I wasn't understood either. That silenced him. Then, as if the universe hadn't had enough irony for one night, Robert Morrison returned. This time with his wife, Margaret, a dignified woman in her 60s. She wore understated pearls and carried herself like someone used to commanding attention without ever raising her voice. Ms. Gallegos, she said warmly, extending her hand. I hope I'm not intruding. My husband tells me your algorithms are extraordinary. I teach computer science at Stanford, and your research has come up in several graduate seminars. Your work on adaptive learning models is brilliant. I blinked. You teach at Stanford? Yes, she said, smiling. And I've been trying to convince my department chair to reach out to you for a guest lecture, but I never imagined I'd meet you here at my daughter's wedding, no less. The irony hit all of us at once. David's casual insults, the family's quiet condescension, and now the revelation that the bride's own mother, a Stanford professor, was using my papers in her classes. Mom stared open-mouthed. You teach her work. Margaret smiled gently. We discuss it often. Your daughter's models are years ahead of where most researchers are now. David's face reddened, his voice barely a whisper. Years ahead, he repeated the shame, cutting through each syllable. Ms. Gallegos, Margaret continued. Would you ever consider lecturing at Stanford? Even a single seminar would be invaluable for our students. I know this is an odd setting to ask, but brilliance rarely walks through a ballroom. Her tone was kind, but my mother's expression was a mixture of disbelief and dawning pride. She looked at me, the way she used to look at David when he graduated college, like she was realizing I'd been more than what she could see. I'd be honored, I said. Wonderful, Margaret said, clasping my hand. I'll have my assistant reach out. As she walked away, I turned to find Mom still staring at me, eyes glassy. Evelyn, she whispered, professor from Stanford, at Amanda's wedding. And she's talking about you. David rubbed his temples. Of course she is, he muttered, because my sister is apparently the Einstein of artificial intelligence. David, Amanda warned softly. He shook his head, half laughing, half aching. Do you know what's funny? I spent half my life believing I was the one who had it all figured out. And it turns out I was just loud about it. I looked at him. You were never cruel on purpose, I said. He flinched. That almost makes it worse. The band began playing a slow, romantic tune. Guests paired off on the dance floor. I sat quietly, letting the hum of music fill the silence that words couldn't bridge. Finally, Dad reached for his drink and took a slow sip. I've been proud of David for years, he said softly. But this, what you've built, Evelyn, it's something else. You didn't just succeed, you created something that changes how the world works. Mom nodded, still blinking back tears. We thought we were helping by giving advice, but we were measuring your worth by the wrong things. Houses, titles, salaries. We never saw the scope of what you were really building. I smiled faintly. Maybe that's because it was invisible. The things I make don't exist in a factory or a store. They exist in code in the spaces between logic and imagination. It's not something easy to show at family dinners. Mom let out a soft, broken laugh. You could have at least hinted at the millions. I chuckled. Would you have believed me? She hesitated. No. David sighed, setting his glass down with care. Evelyn, he said, I owe you an apology. I turned to him. His expression had changed. No arrogance now, no defense, just sincerity. I've spent years talking to you like you were behind, he said, telling you how to fix your life, giving advice you never needed. Meanwhile, you were light years ahead of me, of all of us. I'm sorry. The words came out rough, genuine. For the first time, I saw my brother as human, flawed, scared, trying too hard to live up to his own myth. I forgive you, I said quietly. We both grew up in the same family. We were taught to measure success the same way. You just didn't know there was another definition. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. Thank you. For the first time that night, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. Not gone, but loosening. Across the room, Robert Morrison was laughing with his colleagues. Margaret's pearls glinted in the chandelier light. The whole event had transformed the same music, same flowers, but an entirely different current running through it. The sister they pitied had become the woman everyone wanted to meet. But the truth was, I didn't crave their admiration. What I wanted was simpler to be seen not as a curiosity or a headline, but as a person. David reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We'll talk," he said softly. "Properly this time. No speeches. Just you and me." I nodded. I'd like that. As the final notes of the waltz faded, I looked around the glittering ballroom, the chandeliers, the marble, the perfect perfection of it all, and realized that for the first time in years, I didn't feel small under those lights. The secret was out. The distance between who they thought I was and who I truly am had finally collapsed. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought whispered, "Now that they see me, what will they do with that truth?" The night carried on, but nothing about it felt the same. The chandeliers still sparkled, the band still played, and the waiters still drifted through with trays of champagne. But the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer David and Amanda's wedding. It had become the night everyone discovered who Evelyn Gallegos really was. I could feel it in every glance that followed me. Curious, impressed, a little envious. Every smile held a different meaning now. The people who had dismissed me earlier suddenly spoke to me with reverence as if I'd stepped onto a higher plane. It was unsettling. Amanda's father, Robert, had turned me into the evening's myth. His guests whispered about the hidden genius, and people I'd never met approached to shake my hand. One venture capitalist offered to fund my next big thing. A defense contractor hinted at a government contract. I nodded politely, but inside I felt like I was standing beneath a microscope. David stayed quiet through it all, watching from the edge of every conversation. I could see the storm in his eyes, regret, pride, confusion. Every time someone praised me, he seemed to shrink a little as though he was still processing the whiplash of losing his pedestal in one night. Then came Robert again, his smile radiant. "Evelyn, I hope you don't mind, but I've been telling everyone about your predictive modeling patents. Do you have a few minutes to discuss a potential offer?" "Of course," I said. Mom tensed beside me. An offer. Robert's enthusiasm filled the air. "We're looking for a chief innovation officer at Morrison Technologies. A position that would give Evelyn full creative control of an entire division and naturally the kind of compensation that reflects her brilliance." The words hung there heavy and dazzling. Dad's eyebrows rose. "Chief officer." Robert nodded. "One of the highest paid in the industry. She'd have her own department, her own research team, full freedom." I smiled faintly. "That's very generous, Robert, but I prefer working independently. I build best when I don't answer to anyone." He blinked, clearly surprised, then laughed in admiration. "Of course you do. Independence suits brilliance. We'll work with whatever structure makes you comfortable. The door's always open." As he walked away, my mother stared at me in wonder. "Evelyn," she said softly, "do you realize what you just turned down?" David leaned back, shaking his head. "A position that would make you one of the most powerful women in the industry." "I know," I said, "but power isn't what I want." Amanda tilted her head. "Then what do you want?" "To keep creating," I said, without needing anyone's permission. The simplicity of the answer seemed to disarm them. Mom blinked, processing that. "You've already built something incredible, sweetheart. But don't you ever want recognition." I looked around the room, the stares, the murmurs, the sudden flood of attention that felt more like surveillance than admiration. "Recognition is loud," I said quietly, "but peace is priceless." David's expression softened. "You sound free." "I am." For the first time, my words weren't defensive. They were a statement of truth. The lights dimmed slightly as the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. Couples began to drift toward the floor. I noticed Dad glance at me, hesitant, unsure. "Would you dance with me, sweetheart?" I hesitated. For years, he'd been proud of David's milestones, the degrees, the career, the marriage. He hadn't known I had my own. And yet in his eyes now, I saw something different, pride without understanding, love without condition. I smiled and took his hand. The music swelled soft, nostalgic. As we moved across the floor, I felt the weight between us ease just a little. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "When you were little, you used to take apart every gadget in the house. We thought you were just being mischievous. Turns out you were preparing to rewire the world." I laughed softly. "You grounded me once for breaking the microwave." He chuckled. "You rebuilt it, and it heated faster after that." For a moment, the years of misunderstanding melted away. We just moved together, father and daughter, finally meeting each other on equal ground. When the song ended, he kissed my forehead. I don't understand half of what you do, he said, but I've never been prouder. I swallowed hard. That's enough. As we returned to the table, I noticed David standing by the balcony alone, his drink untouched. I walked over. He didn't look up. You must hate me. I don't, I said gently. He exhaled shakily. You should. I've treated you like a child for years. Offered you advice you never asked for. Laughed at your dreams. You could have humiliated me tonight, Evelyn, but you didn't. I studied his face, the guilt, the sincerity. You were never cruel on purpose, David. You were just sure of your version of success. And I never corrected you. He nodded, voice rough. Maybe I didn't want to see it. Because if you were right, then everything I believed about achievement, about myself, was wrong. Maybe we were both blind, I said softly. You needed validation. I needed invisibility. We were both protecting something fragile. He looked at me, then really looked like he was meeting his sister for the first time. Teach me, he said quietly. Not about AI, about you. About how you live without needing to prove anything. I smiled faintly. It took me years to learn that. But maybe I can show you where to start. He laughed, shaky but real. Deal. Behind us, the chandeliers glimmered, their light softer now. The room no longer felt suffocating. It felt balanced. For years, I'd been the quiet shadow to my brother's brilliance. Tonight, the light had shifted, but I didn't crave it. I'd learned that true freedom wasn't in being seen by others. It was in seeing yourself clearly. Still, as I looked at my family, Mom tearful but proud, Dad contemplative, David finally humbled, I realized something deeper. The secret had been my armor. But now stripped of it, I wasn't just exposed. I was understood. And that felt more powerful than any patent, any dollar amount, any applause. By the time the last guest drifted out, the ballroom was half empty. Only the soft clatter of waiters clearing glasses and the faint music of the band packing up remained. The chandeliers still shimmered, but their glow felt gentler, now less blinding. I stood by one of the tall windows, looking out at the city lights spilling across the streets below. From this height, the world looked smaller, quiet, obedient, full of patterns. I'd built my life on understanding patterns, but tonight, the ones I knew best, family silence, invisibility, had all shattered. Behind me, I heard footsteps. David. He joined me by the window, hands tucked in his pockets, staring at the skyline. You know, he said quietly, I've given hundreds of speeches, but none of them have ever made me feel smaller than the one I gave tonight. I smiled faintly. I wasn't keeping score. I was, he murmured. Then, after a pause, You're happy, right, with everything? I turned to look at him. His expression was earnest, vulnerable, in a way I'd never seen before. Yes, I said simply. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. I wake up every day excited. That's happiness to me. He nodded slowly. Then that's all that matters. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was no need to. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was peaceful. Mom and Dad approached soon after, walking hand in hand. Mom's eyes were still puffy from crying, but her smile was soft, real. We're so proud of you, sweetheart, she said, voice trembling slightly. Not because of the money or the fame, but because you never stopped believing in yourself, even when we didn't. Dad added, We judged by what we could see. You built something we couldn't. That was our failure, not yours. I stepped forward and hugged them both. For years, I'd carried the quiet ache of not being seen by the people who mattered most. Now, as I felt my mother's arms tighten around me, that ache finally began to fade. Can we make it up to you? She whispered. You already are, I said softly. Robert Morrison and his wife passed by one last time on their way out. He gave me a warm nod. I'll have my office reach out about that consulting arrangement, he said. You're a visionary, Evelyn. Don't ever let anyone dim that. Margaret smiled as well. And I'll see you at Stanford, she said. The students will be thrilled. As they left, I realized how strange it felt to be treated not as someone needing help, but as someone others looked up to. It wasn't pride that filled me. It was clarity. Amanda and David joined me near the exit. Amanda looked embarrassed, but genuine. For what it's worth, she said you made tonight unforgettable. I mean, my dress cost more than most cars, but somehow you were the showstopper. I laughed, not my intention. She grinned. Still worked out that way. When they turned to leave, David lingered for just a second longer. I meant what I said earlier, he told me. No more pretending I know better. From now on, I just want to listen. I touched his arm. Then we're already starting over. He nodded, smiling for the first time that night. Not his practiced smile, but something quiet and real. Then he pulled me into a hug, the kind that finally broke through years of distance. As he walked away to join Amanda, I stayed behind a moment longer. The ballroom doors were still open, letting in a draft of cool night air that carried the scent of rain and possibility. I gathered my small black purse, the one that had seemed so plain earlier in the evening, and stepped outside. The city greeted me with its electric heartbeat, the steady hum of traffic, the pulse of neon, the endless rhythm of movement. I slipped into my car, the familiar hum of the engine grounding me. My phone buzzed once with a notification, a new message from my legal team confirming the completion of the Morrison deal, $350 million secured. I smiled to myself. The number didn't matter anymore. As I drove through the city, I passed the towering buildings of companies powered by my code banks, logistics firms, streaming services, entire industries that unknowingly depended on algorithms born from my sleepless nights. And yet the thought that made me smile wasn't the power or the success. It was the simple truth that for the first time in years, I wasn't hiding anymore. The headlights reflected on the glass buildings, casting moving patterns of light across the streets, each flicker a reminder that even in shadows, brilliance finds a way to shine. When I reached my apartment, the clock on my dashboard read 12:47 a.m. I parked, sat in the quiet for a moment, and let the night's whirlwind settle into calm. Then I whispered to the empty car, almost like a prayer to myself, "They finally see me." I stepped out feeling the cool wind against my face. The city stretched endlessly before me, glittering and alive. For the first time in a long time, I felt weightless, free from the expectations, the invisibility, the need to explain. As I looked up at the skyline, I realized something profound. It wasn't the world that had changed tonight. It was me. The lost sister wasn't lost at all. She'd just been hiding in plain sight.